At Allied Armaments, staying ahead means more than producing the best firearms. It means making sure they get where they need to be, fast and intact. That responsibility falls to my division. Our manufacturing network stretches from resource mining in Sidonia to foundries in Gagarin, with distribution hub scattered across UC territory. Moving high-value cargo through contested space, that's a vulnerability we cannot afford. We needed a dedicated transport platform, one built from the ground up for range, security, and throughput. So we partnered with Lindan Engineering Corporation to take lead on this project and brought in Sienar Fleet Systems for propulsion and systems integration. The result was the ZT-4. The ZT-4 Zeta-Class Heavy Shuttle is engineered for reliability under pressure. Its quad-wing design folds upward when landed to minimize its footprint, then extends in flight to stabilize atmospheric re-entry and maximize solar collection. Each wing is lined with radiation collector cells that channel energy into the GDR-565 Grav Reactor system, providing exceptional range and efficiency for long-haul supply runs. Performance means nothing without protection. That's why every Zeta-Class shuttle comes standard with twin T-65 proton torpedo launchers to fend off pirates and spacers at range. We modified the photonic lensing core of the Orion laser rifle to develop Class B-rated KX-7 laser cannons that bypass shields. And 3 Railcaster 30 remote turrets ensure Zeta-Class shuttles are fully protected at all angles. Supporting the entire loadout is a robust T-90 shield array, built to withstand prolonged engagements and push through to the objective. We designed the ZT-4 not just to move product, but to safeguard it. Every shipment it carries represents a contract fulfilled and a system stabilized. In an environment where supply routes are targets and resource lanes are contested, this shuttle isn't just a means of transport. It's a statement to our competitors and our adversaries. At Allied Armaments, our firearms speak for themselves, and we intend to be heard.
Alright shipwrights, welcome to another LEC build. Today we're doing an inspired take on the Zeta-Class Heavy Shuttle from the Star Wars anthology film Rogue One. In Star Wars lore, the Zeta-Class was a heavy cargo shuttle used by the Empire during the years leading up to the Galactic Civil War and just beyond it. It's primarily featured in Rogue One, but it also shows up in the amazing Andor series and a few games like Star Wars Squadrons, Battlefront 2, and Jedi Fallen Order. Now there's two reasons I've been wanting to build this ship. First, I am a huge fan of the shuttle designs that are in Star Wars. Rogue One introduced the Zeta-Class, and it's probably my second favorite shuttle design behind the original Lambda-Class. Interesting side note, the Lambda and Zeta-Class shuttles were introduced in Return of the Jedi and Rogue One respectively, and both of these films happen to be my favorites in the franchise. Just thought I'd share that. Anyways, the second reason is because we finally have the right parts to actually make something like this. So, mod author Diskel has created two mods that add a ton of new ship parts into the game, and the aesthetic of these parts really captures that Star Wars design language. One of those mods is Antares Foundry, which is free, and it comes with a new cockpit, some engines, and dozens of wing ship parts, one of which is able to articulate. But for this build, I'm using Antares Supplemental 1, which is a paid mod that costs 400 credits, and while it comes with less parts overall, every part added articulates in ways that are completely new for the game. Honestly, I think it's worth it just to have access to all of these new moving wing parts. The shipbuilding community has been asking for something like this for a very long time, like since the beginning, and Diskel more than delivered here. But since this is a paid mod, it goes without saying that this build can't be done for free, nor can it be done using just Nexus mods. Of course, there are alternative parts that you can try, but keep in mind the wings won't articulate. You'll either have to build the ship with the wings retracted upwards, as if the ship is landed, or downwards, like when the Zeta-Class is in its flight mode. So ultimately, you can still build something with a similar look, but it just won't be as accurate, unfortunately. You'll also need specific landing bay and landing gear mods to avoid any errors, but I'll walk you through some of those alternatives and their part requirements at the end of the build portion of the video. And real quick, I want to give a shout out to Ares from Mars over on Reddit for letting me use his Allied Armaments weapon catalog. When I was digging around for some extra lore on Allied Armaments, I came across his series of weapon catalogs and immediately knew I had to figure out a way to work it into the trailer. He's put together a catalog for all the major Starfield firearms manufacturers, and they're all seriously well done. I've linked both his profile and the post for the Allied Armaments catalog in the description, so definitely check that out if you have the time. One last thing I need to mention, when we get to the top hull section of the build, you're going to see me use over 100 Gillibrand half snaps, which, I'll be honest, is completely unnecessary. You probably only need half that amount, which I know is still a lot, but I just duplicate them in the video to save time, so I'm not manually placing them one by one, and to ensure that I can place Greebling anywhere that I want. When we hit that section, feel free to change it up however you'd like. It's really just to add some texture so that the top of the ship isn't so flat and a bit more accurate to the actual Zeta-Class. And as long as you keep a similar aesthetic, it really doesn't have to be exact. All that said, I'd consider this an intermediate level build, not because the structure is overly complex, but more so because of all the detailing and greebling that's involved, which again is up to you if you want to copy what I do exactly. As always, if you have any questions or you get stuck anywhere, feel free to reach out to me in the comments. Alright, if you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the build as much as I did, although I will say I am a bit disappointed with how the interior turned out for this. Something happened with my save, and for some reason I just couldn't edit the interior anymore. Like, all the decorative items, they were kind of stuck in place and they wouldn't highlight, so I just had to go with the first draft that I had, which is pretty reminiscent of some of my previous builds. Also, if you decided to skip the Greebling on top of the ship altogether, I completely understand. I do recommend just using a large plate of the top bottom 25% half snaps that's 3 plates wide, and then making a long column of it, as long as you need it to be, so that you can add the decorative missiles on top. That's probably the simplest way to do this, instead of duplicating a row of 5 and then a row of 3 like the way I did. Now, I have a few build requests that I promised to work on, but before I do, I just want to showcase a couple more builds that utilize these Antares parts. I am kind of hooked with them at the moment because they're fairly new and very much in line with the Star Wars design language, but after these next 2 builds, I will be tackling the VCX-100 from Star Wars, which is a request that some of you have made. I'm going to try and pump these out as quickly as I can because I finally started a new dedicated shipbuilding save. This current one that I've been playing on has about 2,500 hours on it, and it's really starting to crap out on me. I'm constantly running into performance issues, stuttering, and crashing. So I've started a new save, and things are running much smoother now. And I'm currently in the process of building some outposts and getting through some quests so I can get the state of the game to be where I need it to be for the sake of recording content. I am beginning to ramble now, so I'll let you all go. As always, feel free to reach out to me in the comments if you have any questions or build requests, or if you just want to chat all things Starfield and shipbuilding. This is Lindan, signing off. See you in the Starfield.